Joining me today is New Hampshire State Senator David Pierce. So David, we were talking about education and funding and sort of keeping our New Hampshire students in the state. And I know in your district and the surrounding towns, that actually is a problem because the demographics we're graying.
Yes.
And a lot of that is that the move-in has slowed and that there's been some move-out. Mm-hmm. So I get this sort of economic picture, and it's probably really quite complicated there. But I want to, before we get to that, let's take a look at sort of the education piece. The state legislature is going to have to deal with that either in special session or in next year's. Will they fund that with, do they need a different tax mechanism?
I believe so. I mean, the candidate I'm supporting for governor has talked about convening a commission which he would chair to set out a 10-year strategic plan for New Hampshire. And I think that's got to be part of the conversation. I mean, property taxes are taxing people out of their homes. And the low level of education funding that we have, the infrastructure and transportation that we talked about, it's unsustainable over the long term.
You're an advocate, I think, of a more broad-based tax.
I am.
Is it income or is it sales?
I prefer an income tax because sales tax are regressive. It doesn't matter how much you make, you pay the same. I think the fairest tax is a tax that is based on your ability to pay it. I know we've talked about this before, and there are some very strict conditions that I would put on any income tax bill that I would vote for. But I'm also realistic in that I know that, consistently the polls in New Hampshire show that the state as a whole is not in favor of an income tax.
Well, I mean, in our earlier segment, we talked about the hospital and the legislation that Medicaid continuation. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting to me, and we didn't talk about that, was how we paid for it.
Right.
That wasn't paid for with a new tax per se on the general public. It was sort of a special thing against the hospitals.
The hospitals chipped in.
And that's sort of the New Hampshire tradition, is to figure out these little carve-outs. And that works when something's relatively small. But what could happen from the Dover lawsuit could be actually quite large.
Quite large.
Have people been talking about that,
yes, of course.
Around the water coolers?
Yeah, of course, because, like I said, the rumor is that, we may have to be called back into special session in order to address the situation. Now, I mean, we find ourselves in a very good financial picture right now. We have an $80+ million surplus from this year. We have the MBT settlement that's coming up very soon. But then again, that also is the New Hampshire tradition of one-time money being used to address a long-term problem. And that's why I think we need to, I really endorse Mark Connolly's strategic vision of creating a 10-year plan for New Hampshire, how we get from here to there, and what our priorities are, what we want to do in this state. Because, again, education, we can't grow as an economy because our high-tech industries can't find the educated workforce that they need. And because a lot of our young people leave the state because, they don't see opportunity here. And a lot of them, are saddled with so much student debt that I heard a story the other day about how that affects life decisions like getting married, having children, things like that. And these problems need to be tackled, and they need to be tackled in a very meaningful, thoughtful way. And we can't keep chipping away at the corners.
Let's talk about the jobs and that sort of angle.
Sure.
Are there things that the state can do to bring more jobs back into this area other than education? Are there incentives? Because in the past, the Sullivan County, Merrimack County, for example, I looked at those. There was a net migration in. We haven't seen that net migration in. And I think that sort of kept the average age. Now, these counties, the Hanover area, I think the average age is growing a bit. Are there policies that would work there? And we got about 30 seconds, so.
Yeah, I think there are a number of policies. I mean, over in my term in the Senate, we passed the R&D tax credit to spur innovation, which of course helps create jobs. I proposed a bill that would grant a tax credit for those businesses who actually create jobs. We've lowered the rates on the business taxes, and I think a comprehensive approach needs to be taken to our business tax structure in the state. But there are a number of things that can be done to encourage that.
Well, we'll have to leave it with that and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Capital Connections, your weekly access to politics and policy along the I-89 and I-91 corridors and how it impacts your life and our region. If you've got a comment or an idea for a future show, please send me an email. And remember, join us again at the same time next week for another edition of Capital Connections.